With this movie, I'd like to show you how we can edit and save brush settings. And what I'd like to do is actually create a frame vignette, more of a creative technique. I'm going to do so using an existing brush preset in Photoshop, but I'm going to make some changes to the brush. And then we're going to save the settings for that brush so that we can use it again in the future. So we can create the same sort of effect over and over again using our favorite new brush. What I'd like to do is use the exact same image that we used in the last movie, which is the redhead girl image, available in the Chapter 5 folder, Working with Brushes. This image comes compliments of Photospin. And what I'd like to do is switch to the brush tool, and I'm going to press B on my keyboard to go to the brush tool. I now have the brush tool accessed, and I think in order to choose the brush I want to work with, I'd prefer to work with the Brushes palette. So I'm going to click the Brushes palette button up here in the Tools palette. That toggles the Brushes palette open. It automatically opens in an outer dock here over on the right side of my screen. And I kind of like that it does that because when it expands out, it gives me all this room to just focus in on the different brushes and the different settings that we're going to be playing with. Okay, so I don't really need to necessarily focus on my image right now, not yet anyway, because right now we're focusing on brush settings. So I like that it takes up all this room on my screen. That doesn't bother me in the least bit. So what I'd like to do first is from the flyout menu here, choose from a particular brush preset. And I have the dry media brushes down here, and I like these brushes. So I'm going to go ahead and select this group of brushes that ships with Photoshop. It's going to ask me, do I want to append the basic brush list that we're looking at here in the palette and add to it? Or do I want to just see the brush preset list that I just chose? And I just want to see my new brushes. So I'll click OK rather than appending. And here are all of the dry media brushes. And the one that I think I want to work with is this guy right here. If we hover over it and refer to the tooltip, it's the Heavy Smear Wax Crayon brush. So it has sort of a waxy crayon look, as you can see, and these are the default settings. Down here, we're seeing a little preview of what the brush stroke should look like, should we start working with this brush. Now, keep in mind, what we want to do is we want to actually erase away the area around the girl's face. Okay, so we're going to create a type of frame by erasing content, and then we'll see white around the edges of her face. And we want to do so with a brush that creates a sort of nice texture that feeds into the image. So using this brush now, we can take a look at the various settings. Automatically, it defaults to the brush tip shape settings. And as you can see down here, we can change the diameter of the brush. We can change the spacing of the brush. And I do think I want to increase that just a little bit. And so we'll have a little bit of space in between as we drag with the brush tool. We can then go into shape dynamics. I'm not going to cover every one of these settings and what every one of these does. I'm just going to go over a few things that I'd like to try and apply to this particular brush. One of them is size jitter. What that means is as I click and drag with the brush, the size of these little areas here, the paint is going to jitter along with it. And I have it set to jitter according to the pen pressure of my graphics pen and tablet, which I'm currently using. So the harder I press down with the pen, the more the size of the paint daubs are going to jitter. And that's an interesting way to create a cool vignette effect, is to have a little bit more randomness in your brush stroke as you apply it. So shape dynamics, that's what we have here. There's also things like angle jitter and roundness jitter. I'm not actually going to apply those here. And notice that you can also apply pen pressure to these settings as well. Anywhere where you see this control menu, you do have that option. So keep that in mind as you're editing your own brushes. Currently, scattering was already turned on. I'm actually going to leave the setting the way it is. I'm not going to apply any pen pressure control. If we wanted to apply a texture, we could click here and then choose a texture from the menu. It also has its own presets, which you can choose down in here. Okay, so if you like getting a textured look to your frame edge, you might want to try working with these. I'm actually not going to apply a texture. Dual brush, I'm actually going to leave the way it is. I'm going to leave these settings down here. I think they look real nice. Then we also have things like color dynamics. I'm not even going to go there. I don't want to apply any color dynamics in this instance because we're basically just working with taking away from the image rather than applying any color. It's not exactly like painting. It's more like erasing. And then we have opacity jitter. This can be an interesting effect to apply if you want to get the effect that you're building color. If you're using it in an eraser sense, the harder we press and the more we press with the brush, the more we can take away. So by turning this up, we could get that effect, but I actually don't want to use that. You see what's happening to the paint daub down here, the stroke. It's getting lighter as we turn that up. So we're going to get lighter strokes if we do that. It's going to affect our opacity as we draw or paint with the brush. And I don't necessarily want to do that. I just want to use my main master opacity setting up here. I'm going to keep that set to 100%. So we'll go ahead and turn that off as well. I do think I want to add a little bit of noise. Wet edges also gives you that building effect, like you're working with actual paint or natural media, which is kind of nice. I don't think I'm going to use it here. Airbrush is the same as the airbrush option up here. Notice that when you click that, it turns on the airbrush option. I'm actually not going to use that either, but I want to let you know that it's the same effect. You can control it in either place, here or here. Then we have smoothing, which I'm going to keep turned on, and protect texture. So we didn't make a whole lot of changes. We made a few changes, and I think I'm going to go ahead and start actually painting with the brush now that we've gone through here and just adjusted some of our settings. That's a great thing about these brushes and the brush engine in Photoshop CS3 is there's tons of control in here. You can make these brushes do what you want them to do. It may take a little bit of time to fool around in here, try some different settings, but it can be worth the effort and worth the time if you get a winning combination. I'm going to go ahead and hide the brushes palette for the time being, go into my layers palette, and I think what I want to do here is I'm going to just add another layer, and I'm going to put it underneath. I'm going to fill it with white by pressing Command-Delete or Control-Backspace in Windows. And then select layer 2. We can even name this layer. Let's go ahead and name our layers. That's a smart practice. Girl, and we'll press return, name this layer, and we'll just name it white canvas or something like that. And press return or enter to apply the name. Select the girl layer, and I'm going to apply a layer mask. Click the layer mask button here. Okay, now it automatically applies with white filled, so it's not hiding anything because white reveals and black conceals. What I want to do then is paint inside of the white mask here with my foreground color, which is black, and that will hide areas with this brush. Now I'm going to increase the size of the brush by pressing the right bracket key several times till it gets to about the size that I think I want to work with, and that looks pretty good to me. I can see the paint daub that has taken over my cursor there, and then I can just start dragging in the mask to hide the areas that I want to create my cool frame. And this might be something that we would use when we place the image in a layout for, who knows, maybe it could be a brochure or a really cool modern hip catalog. And we're going to put our redhead girl in a cool looking frame that has this nice edge to it, sort of a static edge. And this is where you get to be creative, which is kind of nice. It's not all nuts and bolts in Photoshop and settings. There is a creative aspect to this application as well. It's the whole point. We're designers, so we need to design and let our creativity show. I really like these areas where it's sort of poking through. If you wanted to, since we're painting in a mask, we can actually switch colors. And by pressing X, and we now have white as our foreground color, which means that if I paint now, it's going to be bringing back the image. I can change the size of the brush here, and then paint in certain areas, maybe make a few holes along the edge, right? Something like that, just to customize this a little bit more, make it look a little bit more random. That kind of stuff, something like that, kind of neat. If you want, you can even reduce your opacity some. See what happens when you do that. And then using a little bit of pressure sensitivity in the tablet, you can add a little bit more to your cool frame. Something like that. Play around with it. Okay, now keep in mind that what we're doing here is being done in a layer mask. So no pixels harmed. You may have noticed that throughout the movie so far, I've been using a lot of layer masks and adjustment layers, and that's because it's a smart way to work. Because if I decided I didn't like this frame or wanted to use a different brush, I could always throw away the mask or fill the mask with white again and start all over. We used our cool new brush in order to create our frame. Let's say we want to save the brush so that we can use it over and over again and create this frame on several other photographs if we want, all throughout our catalog or all throughout our brochure. What we can do is go back into our brushes palette, and from the flyout menu here, from the palette menu, we can choose New Brush Preset. Basically, we're basing it off of the Heavy Smear Wax Crayon preset that already pre-existed. So if we want to, we can just use this default name, which puts a 1 after it, or we can give it our own name, like maybe, let's put the cursor here at the beginning and say, Ted's Heavy Smear Wax Crayon 1, or something like that, so that you can identify it a little bit easier. Or you can just say Ted's Crayon. Maybe that's too long for you. Something like that. Up to you. Click OK. and then it is added into your presets. Okay, it's right here. If I hover over, look in the tooltip, it should say Ted's Crayon, and it does. So we've added this into our presets now, and we can return to this brush and work with it whenever we want. Something to keep in mind, though, is that if we were to choose, say, a different set in here, like maybe calligraphic brushes, it's going to ask you if we want to replace the current brushes with the brushes from Calic Brushes. We can say OK, or we can append. Let's say OK, but when we do, it says, do you want to save changes to the current brushes before replacing them? And this is where you probably should, because otherwise you're going to lose your brush. You don't want to lose your brush and all of your cool settings, so you're going to have to save this set so that it doesn't get lost. We'll click Save, and I can say Ted's Brushes. Basically what it does is it saves all these dry media brushes with my brush added to it. So it's basically, we made an edit to that set and we're just saving it as a different set. It's kind of like a save as for brushes and brush presets. It'll save it into our brushes folder, in our Photoshop folder, so we'll click Save, and we now have that set. What it did is it went to our calligraphic brushes, so if we wanted to, we'd have to actually choose that set again using our preset manager or by selecting it any of the other ways in Photoshop. We've saved our brushes, we edited brushes, we learned all about using brushes for more creative techniques. In the next movie, what I'd like to do is talk about doing a similar type of thing, only using a brush that was created based off of Illustrator artwork that was imported.